Hey everyone, Ryan Argenta here with an Engage alert. This is in regards to a memorandum of understanding that was just agreed to between the company and ALPA on behalf of pilots. These are relating to company noncompliance with provisions of 23M7, which has been the talk of the town for quite some time, as well as a company in violation with provisions of the automated sick well notification settlement agreement, and it addresses other related issues. This for us is the click to sick as we know it through my crew. Here with me today is Mark Hinczynski. He's the chairman of the Contract Administration and Enforcement Committee, and Ian Turner, the chairman of the Scheduling Committee. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so this MOU, this Memorandum of Understanding, actually involves two previous settle agreements that have been signed, which for the pilots means some permanent and some temporary changes to our PWA as we know it.
That's correct.
And these are pretty big issues. And so this MOU is kind of avert the lengthy and arduous arbitration process by coming to terms sooner than later, right? And you were both involved in that, your teams as well. And so the high level overview here are some changes regarding sick lookback on a temporary basis, a new provision in our PWA that permanently changes the list of QHCPs that now qualify to give verification. And from scheduling, there's a new type of green slip, if you will, called a quick slip. So we're going to dive into all that. Mark, I want to go to you first. Tell me, how does this MOU affect the click to sick?
Well, to start, one of the changes that carried over from the previous settlement agreement is that the PWA is now permanently modified to allow pilots to use a QHCP for all sick verification and GFB calls. This effectively eliminates the requirement for a medical doctor. Pilots will be able to use telehealth as they were before, but it doesn't have to be a doctor on the other side of it.
Okay, so that's a permanent change in our PWA. Previously, if you got a good faith basis call or you had to verify you're sick, it required a medical doctor, an MD or a DO. And so there was a diversity of qualified healthcare professionals that didn't count, right? And so now as this MOU, as part of the settlement agreement, we've permanently changed and we've defined there's a list of QHCPs that now qualify to give that verification. Looking at that list, I mean, it's pretty steep, but it looks like a chiropractor, oral surgeons are in there, mental health professionals, right?
Yeah, it really greatly expands where a pilot can go to make sure that they get the proper note for verification instead of being pigeonholed into a doctor. And I don't know if you've been to the doctor lately, but sometimes it can take you 2 to 3 weeks to get an appointment, even with your primary care physician. And so this will allow the pilots to see other specialists and go to urgent care and use telehealth so that they can get that verification to the company when it's required.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty big win for the pilot group. And, you know, we're all adults. And so now you can go to the appropriate healthcare provider and get that verification. Mark, the MOU addresses this click to sick issue, and the QHCP was a part of it, but tell me about the sick look back. It looks like the company is going to essentially erase any sick look back retroactively back to the July 2025 bid period, and then it goes into the future at some point. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so in the original settlement agreement for click to sick, we had codified in the language that if the company was unable to get the programming done in time, that they would pause accounting for a pilot's look back and it would not resume again until the company had the proper programming in place for the click to sick. When that date came and went, the company said that they had actually been in compliance, and of course ALPA did not agree with it, and it's one of the reasons we're here today talking about a new settlement agreement. But they've agreed to move the look back verification suspension all the way back to the original date from the original settlement agreement, and will continue to go forward until the later of the My Cruise click to sick technology being in place or the implementation of the new quick slip automation.
Okay, and so for pilot level understanding, which is okay. And we've talked about this before where there was a grievance filed and then there's kind of a grievance to a grievance. And so this is the end of that chapter, the end of that road.
I hope so.
Right. And so what we're saying is if you called in sick in or after the July 2025 bid period, let's say it's worth 30 hours of sick, that will no longer count towards your look back for that rolling year-long period. And in the future, if you need to use your sick leave until the company's click to sick program is fixed essentially and verified by ALPA, that sick leave will not count against the look back period.
That's correct. You're going to have 0 hours going towards your look back, looking back to that previous date and through the forward until we've deemed that the company has come into compliance with this new MOU. When a pilot calls out sick, it's going to be 0 hours being added to their look back, which will also trail 12 months beyond when we find ourselves in compliance.
Okay. And we'll hear back from likely you and ALPA when the company is in compliance with the MOU settlement, right? And then you'll know, okay, going forward, this is going to count for my look back. But as of now, the look back is not counted.
Yeah, that's correct. And one place that this agreement differs from the previous agreement is how we figure out whether or not the company is in compliance. And particularly with the click to sick side of the house of this MOU, the company is going to present to ALPA when they believe that their programming is up to par and where they think it's in compliance. And ALPA gets a 2 bid month period to evaluate whether or not the company has come into compliance. And the way we're going to measure that is through pilot darts. We will make an announcement to the pilots, letting them know that we're in that 2-month bid period so that they can send us darts if they're finding that the app is not working. If we find a minimum of 10 darts on a discrete issue, we'll be able to present that to the company, say this is a failure that needs to be fixed, and it resets the 2 bid calendar bid period that the company has to report back to us to see if they're in compliance or not.
Okay, that makes sense. And so, yeah, we'll hear more from your committee and from the union about that. And just to close the loop, for those who aren't familiar, but the click to sick we're talking about is through the My Crew app. When you swipe left, I guess, when you swipe on your rotation to call out sick for that rotation, there had been some glitches, if you will, some IT failures where the sick and the well call didn't go through to scheduling. And so there were pilots who had called in sick and then scheduling called and said, hey, where are you? You haven't reported. There were pilots that called in well, but missed white slip and green slip opportunities and said, hey, I've been well. And the company didn't get that information either. So to get the company, really to incentivize the company to get into compliance with click to sick, these provisions are part of the settlement agreement.
Yeah, so the company was kind of self-invested for operational reasons to make sure that the software was working, because it doesn't help them to have a pilot notify the company that's sick, them not process it, and then have a pilot not show up for a trip that they then need to cover with little to no notice. And then certainly on the well side, pilot calls in well, shows up for a trip, and now they've double staffed a trip. That doesn't make sense either. The one thing that the contract codifies, which is a current practice, is that in those various situations, or even in the one that the pilot misses a slip request, like a white or green slip due to the failure of the app, these pilots are now going to be pay protected. And the company's been really good about making sure that those pilots were pay protected currently as their practice, but this agreement actually codifies that into the language now.
Okay, great. Yeah, that'll be good going forward for everybody. Mark, do you have anything else about this click to sick before we turn to Ian on the scheduling part?
I think one thing that's important to note that is a little different in this MOU compared to the settlement agreement we had previously is that not only will the look back be paused during this period back to the original date and forward, but we also add in that no pilot will be required to verify their sick leave under this section until the completion date. There is going to be a window where pilots are going to have carryover verifications from previous months, and now effective with ratification of this MOU, verification is also going to pause.
Okay, that's a great additive. So if you do call in sick, then there is no verification for that.
This is verification for sick leave specific to a pilot's use of sick leave. It does not apply to the GFB. A pilot's chief pilot may still, under individual circumstances, ask a pilot for a GFB and they must comply, which is different than a pilot's look back and their use of sick time requiring a verification.
Okay, understood. Yep. So GFBs are still in effect. If you do get a GFB, the new provision for the QHCP does apply.
That's correct. Yeah.
But as far as we talk about the 120 hours of sick leave that is unverified, if you go over that, if you call in sick on the 121st hour, then you have to verify. And you're saying currently that's paused.
That's correct. Anybody that would currently find themselves under verification exceeding 120 hours in the last 12 completed bid periods would not need to be verified right now.
Okay. And then you're still within the bounds of your sick leave bank, right? If you're a new hire, you have a certain number of hours. Some have 270 hours total. You're still bound by that bank and what you have left over. It's just the verification look back segment of that.
That's correct. Nothing in this agreement changes how a pilot utilizes their sick bank. If they're out sick for 10 hours, you're still going to have 10 hours deducted from your sick bank. That 10 hours is just not going to go towards the pilot's look back.
Okay, very good. Thanks for that, Mark. Ian, I want to turn to you now. Your chance here. We're talking about a settlement agreement to a grievance 25-24. This is about 23M7, and this has been a hot topic for a very long time. And this relates to the company violating 23M7, which is a PWA section, and it discusses really a long laundry list of grievances and issues with 23M7. And so the result of that is a new quick slip, right? So we've created another level of coverage. Tell me about your aspect of the MOU and tell me about this new quick slip.
All right. So basically, the pilot group has seen is that the M7 usage has been rampant and that the use of M7 and things going on the M7 log have taken much longer than originally anticipated. When it was negotiated originally, things were supposed to be instant on the M7 log, just like a trip that shows up in daily trip coverage. And what we have noticed is that it has taken days, weeks, sometimes even months in some instances for pilots to show up on the M7 roster. So there's really no accountability of that. And we sought out a solution to that. So this agreement kind of dictates how they will document things and how now they do not have the ability to assign a pilot a rotation using 23M7 without it first identifying and paying a pilot on the log. And we've been able to do that by requiring new programming for them to where the scheduler cannot physically pass the step of assigning a pilot a rotation without first identifying and paying the M7 pilot, which then will immediately show up on the M7 log. So that will mitigate a lot of those hiccups that we've been seeing in relation to that. And additionally, the new step, the quick slip step of coverage, because as we've seen, things have gone to inverse assignment so quickly. The whole point of inverse assignment was originally for, it's Christmas Eve back in the 90s, and the gate agent comes down and tells the pilot that they have been inversely assigned to a rotation and they have to fly. They have no other choice. But what we've seen in our tenure here is that the inverse assignment is pretty much a free-for-all of pilots are just calling in, and first pilot to call in gets it. It's not really honoring the inverse seniority. And so we thought of a way to get rid of that with this quick slip, which you'll hear referred to a lot as like a no-trigger green slip, but essentially it's a premium pay rotation that does not require the pilot to meet a trigger. It meets all the requirements of a green slip minus the trigger. So everything for a regular pilot would remain the same. Everything for a reserve pilot would remain the same. It is essentially taking the inverse assignment step of coverage and making it seniority-based.
Okay, I want to zoom out for a second because there's a lot of information here. 23M7, backing up. So 23M7 is in our current contract that allows the company to skip steps of coverage under certain circumstances. And that has been taken advantage of by schedulers by just choosing to skip green slip coverage, to skip any step of coverage to just get the trip covered. And they generally go to inverse assignment, which, as we know, is a free-for-all. It's chaotic. It's whoever calls back first. It's supposed to be an inverse seniority order. It's often not done that way. So it has been a bit chaotic and a free-for-all. And so the result of that is this quick slip, which is now going to be a methodical step of coverage included in our PWA in perpetuity, right?
Correct.
Forever. That kind of creates some order to the chaos of an inverse assignment in that it'll go through ARCOS, right?
Yeah, so it'll go through ARCOS. The main difference between white slips and green slips and this new quick slip is that in those slips, you are seeing two windows. You've got a 12-minute offer window and a 12-minute award window. In this new quick slip, all you will see is a 12-minute award window. So there is only one window, and it is the senior-most pilot who has their hand raised will be awarded the rotation. And if there are multiple rotations, the pilot is allowed to rack and stack just like they do in ARCOS now, except it will be one single 12-minute award window, and all of the rotations will be awarded after that 12-minute window.
Okay, and I assume you put in preferences through iCrew if you want to be included for a call for a quick slip, just like you do for green slip and silver slip and everything else.
That's correct. It will be the exact same inputs as those slips.
Okay. So you put in for a quick slip, ARCOS goes off, you get a phone call, and you can see where you stack there. If there are multiple trips, you can choose which one you want. Again, like you said, rack and stack. And then ARCOS will go through and award trips in seniority order. But the important part here is it's one 12-minute window. So you have 12 minutes to say, yeah, I'll take this. And then once you've said, yeah, I'll take this, there is no second opportunity like you get in a green slip. That's a foot stomper, right?
That is correct. Yes, it is one 12-minute window. There is no auto accept. There's no auto acknowledge. It is essentially replacing the inverse assignment step of coverage, but honoring seniority and in something we can track and something that's completely automated so the schedulers are hands off and no deals can be made or anything like that.
Okay. And yeah, it sounds like it pays identically to a green slip, except you don't have to meet the green slip trigger, which is a benefit. A single 12-minute window, it goes through ARCOS, and the senior pilot who responded will be awarded that trip and obligated to fly it at that point. I guess merely having a quick slip in the system and viewing ARCOS doesn't obligate you because you're not raising your hand at that point. But once you raise your hand and it runs, then you'll get it.
Correct. So putting the slip request in iCrew does not obligate you to anything. All that does is open your door to get a phone call should this happen. And then you have to actually, in ARCOS, raise your hand inside ARCOS to say you are getting it.
Gotcha.
One important thing to point out here, too, is that it's going to have a leveling mechanism just like inverse assignments do, just like green slips do currently.
Okay, so you may get green slip number 1, and then you could potentially get quick slip number 1, and it'll level there. You won't get another quick slip until everybody else who's eligible has raised their hand and been awarded, right? But you could get quick slip number 2, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so inverse assignments are still part of our contract, but when can crew scheduling run an inverse assignment?
So what this does is this codifies that they cannot run the inverse assignment step of coverage until they run this step of coverage. So they can utilize 23M7 to skip, let's say, from white slip to green slip. If for some reason they want to skip out of base white slips, they can utilize M7 to go to green slips, but they cannot go to inverse assignment until they go to this quick slip step of coverage.
Okay, got it. And so then they're kind of in emergency coverage. And then in that case, the 23M7 affected pilot and the quick slip affected pilot would be paid, right?
So emergency coverage is a little different. The emergency coverage is, let's say that scheduling has a list of pilots that lives in Honolulu, and they have a rotation they need to cover out of Honolulu. They have been able to use the emergency step of coverage to call the pilots they know that live in Honolulu that can operate that flight and keep the operation going. And in the past, they only had to pay one M7 pilot. And what they'll have to do now with this new step of coverage is so they will pay an M7 pilot for whatever step of coverage they skip. They will then also pay an additional M7 pilot who would have been awarded the quick slip for that rotation. And then they pay double pay the emergency pilot that they've inversely assigned to the rotation.
Okay, makes sense. And so, yeah, again, a lot of information to digest here, and pilots can read the actual MOU language in its entirety. We can link that to the podcast description, and you'll be getting emails and information from the union on that in general. But Ian, how does this MOU stop deal making with pilots? How does it fix this inverse assignment abuse? How does this restore seniority rights to pilots?
So it stops the free-for-all, first of all, from the inverse assignment call. What we've also been able to do in here is have codified that they cannot run multiple steps of coverage at the same time, and that they also cannot utilize 23M7 to skip pilots within a step of coverage. So we've been seeing that, let's say for a green slip, for example, crew scheduling would call pilots that do not have auto accept on and say, hey, this is taking too long. You don't have auto accept on. Do you want this trip? And so this would stop that completely as well because they cannot use M7 inside a step of coverage. And also with this new quick slip step of coverage, it is all in ARCOS. So it is all automated and trackable. So we can track every single thing that's done in ARCOS on our committee.
Okay, that makes sense. And when does this all take effect? When are we going to be able to select a quick slip in iCrew? I think the company said second quarter of 2026, right?
So in terms of when this goes into effect, I believe it is when they plan to have this programming in place. And the other provisions of this that Mark can talk to as well about the sick leave look back and things like that, are in place until this step is actually programmed.
Right. Okay. And that's why this MOU is drastically different, right, between click to sick and a scheduling thing, but they were agreed upon together and they are in tandem together as far as compliance goes. So that's why we're talking about these together. I want to ask both of you, first, I want to be clear that this MOU was negotiated outside of Section 6, right? This has nothing to do with Contract 2026 or our Section 6 agreement, right?
That's correct. Was basically done under the premise of a settlement agreement for existing grievances. These are not a part of the traditional Section 6 negotiation process.
Okay. And so we didn't have to give up anything to get these settlements in place, right?
Let me be real clear, Ryan. There are no concessions. We did not give up anything to achieve the due benefits of these settlement agreements.
Okay. And these are pretty significant and permanent changes here. And I want to ask, do you think this is actually going to work?
I think there's a few things to consider of why this situation was different from the previous ones. And I think it's a very normal reaction and response to be skeptical of the company and their ability to keep their agreements given the process that we've gone through. You know, when we're right here talking about an MOU that resolves a settlement agreement based on previous grievances, that's just not normal. But this process was a little different. I think the people that were involved in trying to get this agreement were a little different. For example, Ryan Gum was very directly involved in getting this resolution where he was not previously involved in the settlement agreement. So there's a little bit more authority behind them that may not have previously been there.
Yeah, that's actually huge, right? That makes sense because you'd have a grievance, you'd have a settlement agreement, then the company wouldn't honor the settlement agreement to the grievance. So then you'd have to file a grievance against the grievance settlement. It's like triple stamping a double stamp. And now it's codified in the PWA. And so you can say you violated the contract and now we're going to file a grievance. We're going to take action.
Yeah. And this is the first year that we can think of in modern labor relations with Delta and ALPA that settlement agreements were actually in dispute. And to have one is unusual, and to have 3 in 1 year is just kind of crazy. And so I think this was both parties coming together and recognizing the unusual situation that we were in and trying to find a place that we can come together and find a resolution.
Yeah, that's great to know. And it sounds like this is definitely a step in the right direction, especially getting, the company and ALPA on board and hammering these agreements out.
I know that the pilots are probably going to be pretty hesitant based on what they've seen of how M7 has been going. But our committee has been extremely hands-on in the last few months of watching the company and telling them how to program things and testing the programming that they have done to make sure that they will be in compliance of the M7 agreement as originally done. And I think we're very close to being there.
One thing that I would say that was different about this agreement compared to some of the other settlement agreements is that we actually got into the language that ALPA can be a party to determining whether the company is in compliance, not just the company saying whether they are or not and then making us having to file a grievance. We actually have an opinion and the ability to say yes or no. One other thing that I would add that makes this agreement a little different is that we kind of talked about it earlier. The company is self-incentivized to correct some of these things. They're in a position where they're publicly claiming that they're in compliance, but nonetheless, they're updating the app to fix these things that have been identified as failures. And so we're optimistic that this agreement is different because they are actively fixing these shortcomings.
So for the skeptics, did we just negotiate the company into compliance?
Absolutely not.
I think that's a fair question.
No, I think it's a very fair question. And I think it's something that we need to be very clear on, that there were no moving the goalpost to put them in compliance. It was holding their feet to the fire of the original compliance.
I would add that not only did we not have to take concessions on this, we didn't negotiate the company into compliance, but because the company was unable to follow previous settlement agreements, we actually got more for the pilots than we would have had they just followed the original settlement agreements in the first place.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Can I add one more thing, Ryan? And
of course.
With this new quick slip step of coverage, we do not foresee this or intend this to fix anything in regards to how trips are covered. It's just a big tool that we have now available to us that honors seniority, doesn't have a trigger, eliminates deal making, and fixes the inverse assignment problem we currently experience.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a benefit to the pilot group for sure. And I know there's people out there that are saying, well, this is going to reduce green slips or reduce other slips. And really, it's just cleaning up the chaos of 23 M7 violations and inverse assignments. I think there's some real positive outcomes here because of this quick slip, at least from my perspective. I think it might be worth noting that this did go to your elected reps at the MEC.
The LEC status reps had a 7-day review period where if they object, they can state their opinion. And if more than a majority of the reps object, then the MOU must be discussed at an upcoming MEC meeting.
Okay. And so if pilots have questions beyond reading the MOU itself, as always, contact your elected representatives in your base. They're a great source of information. They've been briefed on all this stuff. They were involved in all of this. You can send a DART to the MEC's Contract Administration Committee. Ian, how do you want people to get a hold of you these days?
DART
Never.
to contract admin.
Okay. Send a DART to contract admin with all your questions on the MOU. And please do read the language. You're going to get more info coming out from ALPA. There's going to be a contract administration alert and some FAQs. And of course, we'll keep you updated here on the Engaged podcast. Gentlemen, thanks again for your time. Thanks for the hard work in negotiating this and holding the company's feet to the fire. And I appreciate your work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having us.
You bet.
You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or your favorite podcast platform, and receive notifications when a new episode is available.